Okay, I think we are on air and we are live. So we are without any viewers at the moment, but and also without anyone that's actually come along to be here in person. So we're expecting that perhaps at any moment some people might arrive and join our discussion in real life, in real time. But otherwise, I think we're going to chat between ourselves. So by way of introduction to the world that can watch this online, this is Field Notes, which is Rosie Thomson-Glover and Cat Bagg. I'm Vicky Fiat from Plymouth Art Centre, which is where we are. And what we have tried to do today and also previously was to set up opportunities for artists, writers or curators that are PAC Home members to come and talk to Field Notes who've got a wealth of curatorial experience to talk about artist-led practice or self-initiated projects, if you'd prefer to call it, and particularly keeping in mind the Plymouth Art Weekender, which is on the horizon and that a few PAC Home members are doing self-initiated projects for. Excuse me. But I think perhaps it'd be better to kind of start more broadly than necessarily with the Weekender. Cat and Rosie have been doing some surgeries today with a couple of PAC Home members talking about the kind of projects that they're working on. But I wonder if you kind of want to put into context the kind of the field of self-initiated practice which you're operating in, and that might be relevant to the discussion.
I think the first thing to say is that it comes in many forms, and there is no one way, there is no right way, there is no wrong way for artist-led practice to take place. It's just a really important thing across the UK, particularly in rural areas where you don't have the infrastructure that exists that's set up by large institutions, smaller institutions, and then artist studios. So with that in mind, the artist-led becomes really essential as some sort of informal grassroots infrastructure to get people involved, to get work shown, to develop work, to collaborate, to meet your peer group.
Yeah, it's also a really important way of creating spaces for the kinds of projects which perhaps aren't formulated enough to be put into an institution yet, or perhaps will be outside of the institution's remit. And so it widens the variety of things which are on offer as a viewer, but it also gives artists an opportunity to test things out without having such a responsibility to an audience or to a funder. It gives you greater freedom. And it's probably worth mentioning our background and a little bit about Field Notes.
Definitely.
So Field Notes is an itinerant projects organisation. We work by putting cutting edge artists into communities and trying to make connections, so we very much build up from situations rather than, we don't work in galleries.
For us, a project comes to fruition when certain things come together. It could be a location which has some sort of a history, some sort of community that forms around it. That could be anything from a care home, a disused chapel, an empty shop, a mackerel fishing boat, some woodland. So a space that has some sort of audience, whether they use that for study, for relaxation, for play, or they just pass through it. And then when the timing's right, we tend to start talking to artists all of the time, and there comes a moment when things fall together, and that's when a project begins for us.
Yeah, and I think this way of working is really important to us both, as we aim from having individual practices as artists and organising different events on different levels of being self-organised. So personal art projects, group exhibitions, collaborative projects.
Yeah, I think particularly in the artist-led, collaborative is an essential way of working. I mean, it's not to say you can't do things on your own, but it definitely makes life a lot easier to have a sounding board, to have someone to share the load, because as soon as you create something that has some sort of public-facing aspect, other things come into play, things like gathering an audience, making sure the work is accessible, the venue is accessible, it's safe, it you know, people can get to it, people can park, people can come inside, and then people have some sort of handrail to engage with the work that is on show.
Yeah, whether that is just you approaching each person that comes in on a very low-key, small scale, or whether it's starting to produce gallery-type materials and interpretation, or whether it's some other approach.
Or you make the decision to allow people to find their own way in, and accessing the space, that challenge is part of the work. So it brings a whole other set of rules to your work, whether you're aware of them or not, as soon as you start showing your work, particularly in formal settings. In informal settings, you have to start thinking about other issues that aren't there in the studio when you're creating.
I'm going to interject with a question, but before I do, I'm aware that we have 3 viewers who are watching from the comfort of other spaces, and so I'm just going to point out to those viewers that if they would like to ask a question at any time, then hopefully on their screen they are able to click on the Q&A button, which should make a panel appear on the right-hand side. And at the bottom of that panel, there should be a large green button that says Ask a Question. So they can then type in a question, which we will be able to see here, and I can relay to you both. And hopefully we will have questions appear. But without those happening just yet, I wanted to ask you a bit more. You were talking about all of those kind of other aspects to the projects than just working with the artists. So all those kind of things around interpretation, as well as all the kind of logistical stuff that you have to think about. And do you find yourselves, I mean, I'm aware working in this kind of environment that we almost set ourselves up with a template that we can stray from, but that we use as our kind of basis, and at times even, you know, drop the relevant information into an identical template. So do you feel like you've developed that, or are you keeping it very much that you kind of start from scratch with every project?
We have a variety of different layers of templates in a way, and they're always developing. So there's a template for how we approach a project, or how we approach the marketing of the project, and how we approach the interpretation of the project. And then there are things like pieces of paper templates where things go. But probably the overall template, which is more like our sort of framework for how we do things, is more important to us, because the location varies so much that the output that we're doing has to adapt.
I think if we were working in one location and we were building a program in a space, then more formal templates, which would save us a whole lot of time, would be great. But because the nature of our audience changes, our location changes, the type of work we're showing changes all the time according to the site, it's really hard to create a framework that we can input information into. But I think, as sort of what Kat was alluding to, is that there are invisible frameworks that exist within our practice that we constantly use. So we have ways of working, we have a network that we can activate of artists, of audience members, of community groups. And so those sorts of frameworks, the frameworks that link you to somewhere, that link you to a place, are sort of a constant.
And the way that we would approach talking about work. So the way that we would write about things, we know what kinds of things we might want to touch upon. And every time we approach a publication, we would know that there's a structure which we might abandon if it's not correct for the project, but we know that we can go back to writing, making sure we have a forward, and making sure we have our acknowledgements at the end, and the content, and drawing on different aspects for the content. So there are some basic things that then get.
I think that when you start out in a project, you create the framework, and much like if you're writing a long piece of text or something along those lines, You know, you plan what you're going to do, you set up your framework of who will take on what roles, and when. You'll create a schedule, some sort of time frame that controls when marketing goes out, when the interpretation is created, when artists are drawn in, when transport needs to be arranged. So we create a structure that rules how we run a project, because there are a lot of logistics, a lot goes into running any sort of event that's public facing.
And it's actually such a joy to be in the live section of a project when all of that framework is in place behind you.
Yeah.
Because suddenly, instead of being in a flurry of activity and I just need to get this and I'm actually going to spend more money on that because I haven't got it and I need to do it now, you can sort of step back and experience what you've put together and enjoy that, knowing that everything is in place and there's a strategy for dealing with the things that might come up.
Yeah, I do think it's hard to do that bit, the bit where you step back.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Just enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's so hard to make your head stop and be in real time and take a deep breath and look around, because your head already moves on to the next thing, actually.
Yeah. Speaking of the next thing, I think we've got a couple of questions. Oh, we've got one question which is just to test the question function, which is how many seagulls have we got here? Which
Very good. Good
just
question.
at the moment, no seagulls. It's very unusual. So that,
We can keep a live update on
if we have more seagulls, I'm sure that we'll hear them. So I'm going to delete that question. Thanks, Carl. The next question, which is a real question, is...
I think as curators, digital media, the way we work, particularly in sites that aren't conventional, it's often quite a solid route to take on unusual spaces. So working with artists who can bend imagery to work within a space is something that we come up against a lot. You know, we don't tend to have conventional white walls, which does exclude a lot of practice. Actually, it makes it very hard for us to hang beautiful, elegant paintings because they're fighting against a crumbling wall often. So digital media is a way of engaging with the space and expressing ideas that perhaps works better with our practice.
So yeah, we're definitely interested in digital practice in and amongst different artist practices, but it's also really important to us in the way that we work for our creative practice, and that we have a digital office and we scour the internet for different projects that are going on around the world and different artists and are linked up digitally to each other and to other project partners. And that makes everything we do just that bit more possible from where we work, which is Southwest Cornwall.
And how, because I'm mindful of the person that has asked the question has a particular interest in sort of marketing the arts and communicating about the arts. And of course, you're both on Twitter and have a website. And can you talk a bit more about how you use those, particularly projects such as the one you're working on in Falmouth at the moment, which no doubt is a way of reaching wider audiences, and you can.
I think that's it. It's a way of reaching wider audiences. I think for us, the digital content we produce, our social media, the online platforms that we sort of cultivate throughout a project, tend to do that far-flung reach. You know, it brings us into contact with arts organisations in Greece and America, other rural arts organisations around Europe, and it sort of taps you into a community that you could never access without online.
It was really interesting doing the first Inland Art Festival last year, that we started to learn more about the capacities of the different social media that we use for what they work best for. And Facebook, for instance, is probably a much better way of communicating with our local-ish dispersed audience about what's going on, and for them to have an instant communication back with us and ask a question about where something's happening or
how they get
there, if they haven't quite understood that. Whereas Twitter has got this incredible international reach, and the spread of where things went through Twitter was astounding. I think. For that project particularly.
Yeah. We've had, I'm going to lead on to another question that we've had text coming by text. As,
good use of digital media or a range of...
We're working through a variety of digital media. We do now have 4 viewers online, although no additional bodies in the room. So we've had a question come in by text, which is from Claire, who you met with this afternoon during one of your surgeries. It seems as though the tablet and the phone are proving to be tricky, and there doesn't seem to be the green button which we were hoping would appear on her devices. But to kind of lead on, really, I think, from what you were touching on there about being based in South-West Cornwall, she says, continuing something that you were speaking about earlier in your surgery sessions, can you speak a little about the challenges and possibilities of working at the periphery?
I think, well, the periphery of the UK, I suppose, is the first thing to deal with. I mean, being outside of cultural hubs, of large centres of people, change the rules that you work within. I mean, it changes your audience hugely. It changes the mindset that people approach contemporary art in, and it throws up a lot of challenges within a local community initially. And the challenges come from the other direction as well. I think it's something around credibility about rural art scenes. There's always...
There has been a historic the perception of credibility if you're operating outside of an art world centre. But it does feel like maybe this is a point where it shifts.
Yeah, I agree.
And we like to do as much research as we can and get out. And we went to speak to Adam Sutherland at Grisdale, and I think what's going on there is amazing, and the history of what's gone on is so interesting in the way that it's adapted to its own situation and has become perceived on a more international basis with a level of credibility over a period of time. And being connected digitally and thinking about it's a huge advantage to being somewhere outside of a centre. But I think also it's to do with, we've shifted our perception. We don't really think about being on the periphery of potentially London or Bristol. We think about more being part of an international art scene. And we it's just as easy for us to get to Venice and go and see the Biennale as it is to go and spend a week in London and run around all the shows there. And something about that is quite freeing, because actually
we're not tied into a sort of a cultural perception of what should be shown. Actually, we just don't have that set of rules. We're not aware of them on a day-to-day basis. So when we're programming or developing ideas, it doesn't enter our head as to what we should be producing. It's a whole other set of factors. And I think there's something really exciting about working on the periphery, trying to articulate something new, whether that's in your practice as an artist or as a curator, as a writer, as a thinker. It seems to me where the edges of things meet is where the most exciting stuff often gets produced. I mean, it does then mean that it takes time for other people to catch up with that way of thinking. And I'm not sure if we are, as curators, at this stage. I mean, we're sort of quite early on in our journey as curators. I don't think we're trying to necessarily push theoretical boundaries. We're more at the stage where we're trying to open up contemporary art practice to a wider audience instead. I think it's interesting. I wonder how different it is as a practicing artist, how you see working on the periphery as opposed to a curator.
We've had a response, a very positive response from Claire, who says yes, great changing perceptions of what is the centre and changing the rules nicely. very Claire. I think that's really an idea of not just the periphery necessarily being a geography, but actually when we're talking about you know, the world we're working in, and how artist-led practice can actually be at times more exciting, because there isn't that rule book, and there aren't those walls that you're restricted to work within, and also you can, well, I think the rules actually, you don't have to abide by them, and it is that freeing, those freeing possibilities of doing something that is totally your own, and that without, by doing things like project funding, you will only do that project if there's the money for it, and then it can be really brilliant. Whereas knowing from an organisation like this, there is an expectation to constantly deliver, and that when money gets tighter and tighter, that can be very restricting and challenging. And I'm not implying that money's not a worry for either of you or for other people working within artist-led projects, because I know it's a
huge debilitating aspect of an artist-led practice, I think, because intention is so good, but then you have the rest of your life to balance with it, and things have to be funded. There has to be money in place.
But it takes so much time and energy to acquire the funding, and as an individual artist, you'd be very in a similar position to what we are in terms of project funding. That you have to develop a project to a certain point to take it to a funder. And obviously, if you're not within an organisation which is funded, that time,
I'll never pull that time back.
So it's an interesting
struggle.
I mean, unless you have a fabulous personal income, cat.
With funding.
Where are they?
We do have another question. I'm going to read it out and then select it for all the viewers to read. We have, how important are the artist-led networks for you, both Southwest-based and on bringing your networks to Cornwall, or for field notes to go beyond Cornwall? How important are other artist-led networks for you, both Southwest-based and internationally?
I think from a Southwest perspective, first, everything, that's how we work. We work within networks. We activate some at certain times, and the other ones always know what's going on. I mean, even with the Wanderers that we're working on now, it was supported by Newland Art Gallery, and then we've been talking to Fish Factory about certain things, and HAL projects about certain things, and Medium Right. So these are other artist-led spaces, and even if projects then don't come to fruition within that framework, the conversation's been had. I think there's a sort of constant level of mutual respect and support.
Our local network is incredibly important to us, because Cornwall is a dispersed community. We all have to drive miles one way or another to get to all the things that we want to see, and you can begin to feel quite isolated if you're not linked in to the different networks. And it's a generous network, actually. Once you're able to people about different stuff, being part of that and being active. And then we're always interested in trying to link in to networks in other cities and other areas. And we have some networks from personal experience, from living in different areas in the country, and we're building some through field notes, and it's just a kind of overlaying process.
I think that, much the same way that larger institutions form networks, so Tate Plus, they support each other, they share work, they show work, they share audiences. The artist-led sector works in much of a similar way. I think people are naturally towards each other. and towards like, audiences are hard to look after, hard to grow, and easy to show support.
Yeah.
Within the arts ed sector, it does that for you. It shares the workload.
It has a real correlation to the way we think about our audiences and how we reach them as well, because, for instance, for the Wanderers, one of the aims is to reach a cultural audience that might not otherwise be engaged with Newland's art programme or anything that we might have.
Or artist-led visual arts.
So we're working with the National Trust, and we're working with Falmouth Art Gallery, who have the local arts, and we're or sort of the local arts engagement and family engagement. We're working with the library, and we're working with Falmouth Town and Falmouth Week, and we've got a lecture going on at the Royal Cornwall Yacht Club, and their members always sign up for lectures, and it's a lecture, so here's a lecture, but also it's an art book. And so instead of saying we're going to go out into a community and trying to build a community audience, we're working to try and link into existing networks and existing communities and explain to them why it might be interesting and find the links.
And then the hope is that through that sort of level of integration into communities that are outside of contemporary art, it opens up a world to them of sort of alternate cultural practice that you can't access on a sort of mainstream map, but exists and is so strong in Cornwall.
Great. There is. So the second half of that question is, based in Cornwall seems further away than Plymouth.
Yes.
Are you, indeed, well, depends, far away from
what?
From where.
Yeah.
Are you planning on bringing your networks to Cornwall? I don't know if that should be Plymouth, or for Field Notes to go beyond Cornwall?
I think our intention was definitely to operate on a national level, but we've been going every year now. And the majority of our work has been focused in Cornwall. I think the sort of practice that we've started to develop is very much, it's a grassroots practice. It comes up from knowing an audience and knowing a set of wants and needs that are happening locally, which naturally makes it more, it makes sense to work in Cornwall, but with a national, international understanding. So the theory is that the works that are created that we support could be removed from their Cornish setting and placed anywhere in the world and have a similar resonance.
But I think our hearts are in Cornwall and our minds are in Cornwall, because it's something, the more we explore, the more interested we are in working in different ways there. But it doesn't mean that we wouldn't necessarily go elsewhere. We've dipped our toe over the Tamar a few times. We definitely do it for research and for things like this.
And I mean, the artists we work with are based across the UK, across the world, and it's very much about finding the right artist for the right situation, regardless of where they're from. So in that sense, we're constantly pulling our networks into Cornwall and then expanding them again. I think, it's
we have to build from where we are
Yeah.
and build out, and then take what we've learned.
I think to be able to build your kind of reputation for what you do and for people to understand what Field Notes is, and actually more than just Field Notes, anyone doing an artist-led project or a self-initiated project, for people to understand what it is you're doing, the best way of building that is to do something, build up that body of practice to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And the easiest way to start doing stuff is to do it where you live.
But I think, absolutely. And I think beyond that, it's recognising that there are other organisations across the UK trying to operate in a similar way, and that we should definitely make more of an effort to be in contact with them to form some sort of artist-led network. I mean, there are networks that exist, there are platforms that exist to support artist-led practice, but like Visual Arts Southwest, like the sort of listing sites. But I don't know it'd be lovely for there to be some sort of convention that got everyone together, you know, to have those conversations and advocate for each other up and down the country. I mean, UK it's not big. People travel up and down all the time, and if there was some sort of network that allowed you to support each other's practice in that way, would be quite an exciting thing.
Yeah, so the Common Practice Network, which exists in London, is a really interesting model, and they are small to medium, they say small, organisations like the Chisenhale Gallery and like Gasworks,
Studio Voltaire,
who are
established,
established and to us more sizable than
we think we must be minuscule.
We must be minuscule. If we're small, then
micro.
Exactly. But yeah, that's interesting because they have come together because there's been a value conversation through Arts Council and other funders about growing and growing their outputs and growing their audiences. And they said, well, actually, we do what we do well because we are the size we are, and we're able to take the risks that we can. So the only way that we would like to grow is to become a network or to support each other. And I think that's what's happening with museums in Cornwall. They're trialling the museums partnership because Cornwall has more. There are hundreds of amazing regional museums right away across the UK, but Cornwall has a particularly high wealth of it. And so the museum's partnership's been set up to allow for a conversation, a dialogue, a sharing of resources and a sharing of audiences, and it's creating a format that can support that. It's interesting. I mean, I think the other thing with Common Practice is this is a set of organisations who really feel that their value is misunderstood, that they're providing a service that the larger institutions take advantage of potentially. They're taking the risks, and larger organisations are then taking on the artists once the risks have been taken. And I think that there's an argument for artist-led practice taking on even more risk. You know, there are stepping stones, there always are. It's not a conventional hierarchy with one being better than the next, but frameworks are created before the small institution steps in that perhaps could do with more recognition, and some sort of artist-led network could really, you know, it's about advocacy and supporting each other. I think you know that's how things move forward, and partnerships. That's really key now. It's really key to our practice, and I think it will become more and more essential as funding disappears, as organisations disappear. This sort of idea around partnership will become more and more essential.
Yeah. Just as a comment, one of our viewers has sent a message by text, but presumably still struggling with the question button not appearing. But not a question, this is just a comment to suggest the A3 project space in Birmingham and their We Live Here programme. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you. A3 project space.
Yeah. Where you just mentioned about your knowledge of the museums partnership, I thought we got a little insight there, because you've been working with Penryn Museum. I'm getting the sense that that has been useful for finding out about different kinds of institutions and different ways that those kind of places work. I wonder if you can say a bit more about that.
Penryn Museum is a gem. It's one of those special spaces that exist because of someone's willpower. And it was set up in the 70s by two women. One of them, Shirley, she still runs it as a caretaker, as a volunteer, for the love of it. I think her attic is just full of bricks found from around Penryn. She collects everything. And there is no filter as to what goes into a museum and what should go into a museum and what shouldn't. And it's run completely by volunteers. It got accredited this year. And that's when we got involved as they were going for accreditation. And we got onto the new Expressions 3 scheme.
Network. And so we've worked with the museum for over a year, and the museum is part and parcel of the town council as well.
Mm.
That's where, so yeah.
It's the project, I mean, it came about because New Expressions wanted to get new perspectives on museums, on heritage collections, and contemporary art was a good way to go about that. I think there are some statistics somewhere that says that I think more people interact with contemporary art than they do with museum collections, which really, I don't know why it surprised us so much, but it's just, yeah.
So the idea is it's a commissioning programme, and we commissioned 2 artists who had come through Falmouth University at different stages in their life, but hadn't actually ever made it into Penryn Museum.
Oh.
Like most of the population of
Penryn
and Falmouth, people would go, where is the museum? It's in the middle of the high street.
It is so in the middle that the road actually has to split to go around.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And brought them in to work with the museum, and it's the museum's first encounter like this, and they were initially very hesitant, and then they met Matt and Richard, who we worked with, and adopted them.
So Matt and Richard are both based in London. They're on really interesting journeys as artists, very different ones, in the way they show, in the work that they make, in the way they think, and in the type of people they are. And I think the museum just fell in love with them to the extent that both of the works have now been donated to the museum's permanent collection. And the works are so at odds with the museum. I mean, it has a mummified rat, it has general bits of rock.
It has a wasp's nest, which is linked to the story of the Bishop of Exeter's vision of a bee's nest in a tree at the site of Glasney College.
Yeah, it's full of people's stories, actually. And
it's a real reciprocal of everything to do with the town and the community. And there's no cut-off point. So there's a storytelling chair with tales from people from Penryn who we have been told by the volunteers are now mostly dead.
Yeah, they're all dead. They're all dead.
But it's really quite recent, and so it's part of a continuing history of the town as opposed to history.
It's not static.
It's not static.
Yeah, I think, and as a way of working to sort of recognise networks that already exist and finding some sort of self-organised way in, and you know, we provided a service in a lot of ways. You know, this was a museum that had no facilities, it had no resources, it had no staff who could give time, and no, you know, none of those things, interpretation, marketing, that's just another language. And you know, we have a skill set that worked really well with what they needed, and I think that's quite a lot of what artist-led practice is about, is seeing what you can do, where are there spaces around you, and finding some sort of way to fill them.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about that project is the slowness of it. So there are 2 fantastic commissions which have now been adopted into the museum collection, and we've done some events, and there's educational resources and things like this, but it's not a huge project.
No.
It's not a 2-year project, but we worked with the museum for well over a year and just kept having meetings and meeting the volunteers and going to their meetings and hopping in and taking some photos. And that's a really fantastic way of building a relationship to run a project, rather than going in with a project and trying to make it happen. Because we built relationships and
that still exist,
yeah,
and are really important to us. Really important to us, and the people who run the museum, who support the museum, were essential to the success of the project, and we'll carry on working with them for as long as we can.
And instead of them feeling like, oh well, we were involved in this, and you know, we got some artwork, and maybe a few more people came to the museum, but I don't know if we do it again. They feel overwhelmed by the different levels of involvement that have gone on through working with the artists on a one-to-one personal level, or working with us on a personal level, through a group of students that we were able to work with who all created their own artworks in response to the collection. And yeah, I think that's a really important lesson for building partnerships to work, is not to rush it.
Yeah, and to let things unfold, not necessarily feel like you have to control every step of the journey or take the lead. You know, I mean, someone has to drive things and shape things, but it's not about herding decisions or ideas, but seeing what exists, what the feelings are, and being really sensitive to them.
Do you think you've come to realise that in a way that because you have come from a background of being artists yourselves, that's almost how you would like somebody to work with you? If do you both continue your own art practice?
Slowly.
Yeah. So, you know, is that how you would like curators to work with you?
I think, well, from my perspective, because we met doing a master's at Falmouth, we did the curatorial practice master's, and it was led by Kate Southworth, who is an artist. She's a practicing artist. She has, it's a participatory practice. It's often very experiential, and she ran an artist-led project called Wrong project.
Yeah.
What was it? When she went into the village halls.
Electronic Village Green.
Yeah, EVG. It's just confusing. There's another one.
Electronic Village Galleries.
Yeah. And she wanted to show films from artists based nationally, internationally. She's really interested in web art, and she wanted to bring contemporary film work into village halls. So that was sort of her angle as an artist. And then the other side of it was Ginny Button, who has had a completely different career, sort of going from Tate Britain, Turner Prize, that sort of Courtauld Institute, you know, that kind of curation, which is quite, well, it's different. It's not artist-led.
She's described herself as a princess curator. She said, "I've never had to hang a work."
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is totally the other end of the spectrum to what we do.
Exactly. But her rule very much was that you start from the artist, you start from the artwork, and you never overlay things. You never try and shape a decision or force an artwork onto a group of people or a group of people onto an artist. And I think that sounds like good manners.
And it's a really interesting way of working.
Yeah.
I think, coming from artist backgrounds,
and having a love for contemporary art. I mean, you know, we're not trying to save anyone. We're not a community group, and we're a community interest company, but because we exist because we believe in the power of contemporary art rather than the other way around. I think.
And how did you come to the decision to go through that kind of formalising process of becoming a community interest company rather than just a totally informal two people making
slowly?
In some ways it happened to us because we knew that we worked together really well on the MA. We worked on external projects somehow, despite the fact that we had 4 weeks off over 12 months. And we knew that we wanted to run another project together, and when we sat down and started talking about that, there were lots of different ideas, and lots of which are still in folders and waiting to be tapped into. And we went for some funding, and we went for some projects, and we got quite a lot of them back. And so suddenly, instead of having a project to work on together, we got a selection of different things that we were going to be doing for a while. And we needed a way to manage that.
I think the other side of it is that one of our aims is to go beyond the arts community, and that involves talking to people who aren't engaged in contemporary art, who don't have an understanding or necessarily an interest in contemporary art that they know of yet. But one of the ways to talk to people who aren't engaged is through coming in a scheme that they understand, that they can support, respect, and really see. And being a limited company, a community interest company, is a way of engaging with business. And we try and run as a business. Actually, it's important to us, especially if you're taking in money and money's coming out as quickly as it's going in. Having some sort of recognisable system for working in that way is really important.
And becoming an entity, a body that people can recognise.
Yeah,
really important.
it's quite fun as well,
fun.
because it's, you know, essentially we're two artists, it's an artist-led practice, and you know, it's our mini institution, it's our way of working. We respect Field Notes as a project, as a project's organisation, and giving it some sort of legal entity is part of that.
Yeah, I can't, hearing you say that you think of yourselves as a mini institution, I can't help but think of Rosalie Schweiker, who's at Space at the moment, who was in Inland.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting to.
I think our
Exactly
definition of
right.
an institution is probably quite different to an
Yeah.
institution's definition.
Yeah.
I think for us, you know, like I love Rosalie Schweiker's work and love reading the sort of first output of that.
Yeah.
And that, you know, it can be whatever you want it to be, as long as it's a space for ideas and a space for people and a space for conversation. That's our institution, you know.
Yeah.
That's Field Notes for us.
But it is interesting, and we're all guilty of drawing these boundaries between what is an individual practice, what is a self-organised practice, what is an artist-led practice, and what is an institution. And it happens from the institutions looking down, and from the artists
Looking sideways.
and up and across. And,
Yeah.
and they kind of, so we'll have conversations where they go, well, are you artist-led?
Yeah.
Because we're curatorial, and we come at things from a curatorial perspective.
And that's important to our practice, that we don't want to blur the boundaries. We don't want to be the artists in our project.
Oh, you've led on to the next question so perfectly. So, artist/curator.
Yeah.
Do you both believe an artist can be a curator and a curator an artist? Which I think does lead on from where you're going.
Yeah.
With whether you actually choose to be in.
I feel quite strongly about this. I think, of course, you can be a curator. Of course, you can be an artist, but I don't think you can curate your own work.
Yeah. I think you can have an artistic practice, which is curatorial, whereby your output is curated from other things or from your own practice or from outside.
You overlay a curatorial framework to how you deal with information and ideas.
And as a curator, you can approach things from an artistic perspective. So our project, the Curators Room, is really about bringing people together in conversation, and then about research. And we're not curating anyone's artwork by putting on the Curators Room in a sort of exhibition sense, although artworks might come into it.
Yeah, but we're bringing an audience.
And so that in a way is an artistic project for us, but it's a curatorial artistic project. So the boundaries are very fluid. But yeah, I think I totally agree with Rosie. I had an experience early on in my career where I was asked by a gallery that I was working for to organise an exhibition in which I was an exhibiting artist. And I did it, and I said never again. I couldn't, my work was quite complicated. It involved projection and installation and quite a lot of setup. And I had 6 other artists who I was responsible for. And I ended up setting up my work as we were ticking into the private view because I couldn't, it was outside of the exhibition space. So mine was the one that was going to have the least impact upon anything else going on. And my first responsibility was to those other artists who I was looking after. And that compromised my responsibility to my own work as an artist. And even if you could say that might be the most desirable conflict of interest, is where you prioritise the other artists against your own artwork. That is so difficult. And yeah, there's no happy solution to that, I don't think. You're always going to be questioned for it by somebody externally. I think you should be always questioning that yourself. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of positioning that goes on. There's a relationship between artists and curators, and my understanding of a curator is that they are there to care for an idea, for an artist, for an artwork, for an audience. And it would be very difficult to do that because the responsibility of an artist is very different to that of a curator. Yeah, I think it's much like, I think that sort of issue comes up within the curatorial field as well. I mean, it's sort of being talked about a bit at the moment, is a curator for, what is it called? It's the contemporary art gallery that the Smithsonian owns in Washington, and they've just taken on an assistant, well, maybe not an assistant curator, but a new curator who also works for Art Basel, I don't know how you say it, which is obviously one of the biggest commercial art fairs in the world. And there's that relationship of showing, if he's discovering artists, showing artists at a Smithsonian endorsed institute, that adds value to work that he is then commercially selling. And it's a similar conflict of interest. That's what it is. You know, I don't know how.
It's an ethical. It becomes an ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
Of sorts.
What does the questioner think?
Yeah.
Do they have a background as a curator and artist?
They do, in a way. Not so much a curator, but as someone that runs a space.
Yeah.
The only time. So I've just had a comment that this is great to listen to, better than having the radio on. That's great.
It does feel radio-y.
Yeah, it does. Oh, we've opened up a whole new realm with possibilities for ourselves. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I think I have discovered a project recently where I think I felt very clearly in the same place as you around you cannot include your own artwork in a curated exhibition. But I have discovered this project where actually I can totally see that their model is in opposition to that. And this is French Riviera in London, which is Sam Levac and Jen Lewandowski. Actually, I don't know how to say her surname. I've come across them. They've currently got a piece of work in the Plymouth Contemporary Open. So I was having...
Which one? Let's see. Oh, which
the sort of patchworked velvet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And talking to them about the way they run their space and looking at their website, actually the projects that they run in that space are almost exclusively projects that they are doing in collaboration or in partnership or in conversation with other artists. And that I can see is a very distinctly different model.
I think it's different to being curatorial.
Yeah. But there are still those grey areas, I think.
There are huge grey areas because what is, we're hugely excited by and interested in the DIY and the self-organised.
Yeah.
And if an artist-led space, led by artists, putting on shows of your own work with other people's work, there's a curatorial aspect to what you're doing. But you're coming at it.
You're not curators. You're
you're
more
acting as
artists,
curator.
Curator.
And because as artists, you should be able to organise exhibitions and projects where you collaborate, or just inviting people whose work has
and it's an important part of the practice. It comes back to the network and the partnership, and it's important. I think it's how you speak about it, how you see it. Because I remember years ago at the Hayward Gallery, was it maybe whilst in that Messenger show was on, Mark Wallinger curated a show there. I wish I could remember its name. And it was very much curated by Mark Wallinger, artist curator. And his work was everywhere. It was everywhere. And I remember thinking, it feels a bit like write the theme tune, sing the theme tune, star in the show. I don't know. It was just a bit too much me.
Yeah. So it's not just, it's not just what you say you're doing, is it? I think it's how you think about it, what your intent is, and honesty around that. Because if you are saying, we run a space where we work with people that we want to work with as artists, and
it's our space. It sounds very much like they have almost an open studio, a project space that grows their practice. With other people.
Whereas your intent of, and I've had that conversation with a couple of PAC Home members where I've had artists come to me and say, I'm thinking about doing this project. I want to show this artist and this artist, and we're going to do it here, and we're going to, you know, engage these people and these people. And they kind of know to use certain words that I think are kind of funders, buzzwords almost.
Yeah.
And then I kind of say to them, but why are you doing it? What's your, as an artist, what do you want to get from it? Is this you building your network? Is this you wanting to learn something about your own practice? Or are you just trying to find distraction to not deal with problems you're having in your studio with your own work? And that's a really difficult conversation to have, but can really can be really important for, I think, people thinking about what they want to get from artist-led practice.
Yeah, I think that's where you have to start with if you're going to do something. There are no wrong reasons, but you have to know what your reasons are, and then everything builds from that. The way that you communicate where it is, how it's presented, should start from the why you're doing it.
Yeah, and I think you owe it to yourself to do the best you can do, and it's recognizing where your skills lie and where other people's lie, and it comes back to partnership, collaboration, but it's knowing where your line needs to be drawn in that particular moment, and where perhaps it's worth getting someone else in to do the objective side. You know,
something that's been really interesting about setting up as a business, because we've been in business courses and business advisors and business mentors, and as well as arts centre and world.
So I was trying to develop our practice as curators, you know, to carry on thinking, to make sure the work is relevant and the contents is there, and that we're supporting the right artists, and to make sure that they get the most out of working with us.
And so we've been asked questions from really different perspectives about why we're doing things. People who really, you say, oh, I want to tell people about this. Well, who do you want to tell? And where are you going to and how are you going to tell them, and who are they? Who is this person you're trying to communicate to?
Business advisors always want you to describe the person, and they really describe it, you know, so 2-inch moustache, Guardian reader, bites his nails on a Sunday, drinks lunches, you know, and I think it's fun for them.
It blows our mind because, it's the structure of your typical business is not the structure of your typical arts organisation.
No, and the audience, you know, you don't have that one person in mind.
But if you are doing a self-organised project, there are all sorts of reasons you might be doing it. You might just be doing it so that you have your deadline and you test out a new artwork. And you may want just a few key people who you respect to come in and give you some feedback on that. And you don't need a public audience.
Yes.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You might be doing it because you really want to sell your work, or because you really want to promote it to galleries or organisations or curators or critics or collectors, in which case you need to find a way to communicate with those people and either get them into the space or send them something beautiful which will make them think about the space. And I found it really interesting when I was working in London that I spoke to different gallery directors and curators who had nominated people for prizes, having never seen their work, but having received a really beautiful invite card and seen a really good website with really great documentation, and just thought they were the right people. And so you don't necessarily need the person across the threshold, which is an interesting with the digital.
I think it's how you frame yourself and distinguishing yourself as an artist, as a curator, and just knowing where the boundaries lie. And they don't have to lie in the same place all of the time. They can shift according to your needs, according to your project, but just respecting that exists.
Well, we're coming up to about an hour of discussion with questions from our viewers, which has been really good. Now, we haven't got any other questions popping up, but if there were any last ones, they could appear now.
Quickly.
So, without one coming through, I'm going to just ask you for one more, which you kind of touched on there, and I think to link it back to a couple of things we were talking about earlier, so not to try and look for repetition, but around that idea of how your audience for your projects and for your work as artists or as curators or doing artist-led, self-initiated, all those words. How they can be the people that aren't crossing the threshold, or and that kind of importance of documentation and stuff like this, this kind of evidence.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can say a bit more about, your considerations around that, or perhaps how that's affecting the way that you're working.
It's interesting with the project that we're running at the moment, The Wanderers, because we're working with a collective called Medium Rare, who are artists, curators, photographers. And I guess we're learning all the time about the way that we document our projects, because our projects appear and disappear.
Yeah, I think it's something we find particularly difficult, and it gets more difficult when you know that your audience, you have your sort of first-hand audience, you come who experience, and this sort of stuff becomes less important. But with Twitter, with social media, your audience is so huge that finding some sort of way to document the work becomes more and more important. And because a lot of our work is ephemeral or exists in a small space in a small period of time, to document it is a challenge and is a skill that we're still trying to work out, I think.
So what Medium Rare are testing for us this time is they've established a website, which is sort of a portal or a receptacle.
It's very simple. It's thewanderers.co if you're looking. .co.
And they're also going to build a publication, which will be the documentation of the artworks in the programme. But it's not quite documentation, it's not straightforward, it's not images of what's happened with an explanatory text. They're working with each artist, and we'll fill the pages according to the conversations with the artist about what should be there.
Interesting.
Because, for instance, the sound piece, which is now in situ in the municipal buildings in Falmouth, there's no point in taking a photograph of. And if you were to take a recording and put it on the internet and make it available, you wouldn't have the experience of experiencing it in the building with sound coming from different directions and a passing public. So you have to think of another way. So yeah, it's something we're testing out, but which is quite important.
Yeah, I think I'm Medium are planning on creating a really beautiful publication as well, and it's understanding that its value is beyond its contents. It's in it as an object, as a memory, I suppose, that can travel. And the plan is to get this in shops around Falmouth and further afield, and not just arts sort of related organisations, but high street shops, because it's a beautiful object. And that's really powerful, because it means it can travel, it can be in someone's life, it can be picked up by anyone. And that sort of gives huge agency for the artists involved and for the project and for the ideas.
And that is our 6th artwork in our programme of commissions, is the one that is the receptacle for everything else.
Yeah. I think, we were talking earlier and talking about documentation and evaluation and how you think about all of that. And it's really important. As an artist making work, you reflect on your practice. That's how your practice can grow. And I think it's much the same for any exhibition, for any show. It's still dealing with ideas, it's dealing with real things, and how you collate that information is really important. It's really difficult.
It's really important to us when we are looking at artists.
Yeah.
And more often than not, we'll be looking on the internet, even if we've seen a piece of work in reality somewhere. You kind of go, I saw this 7 years ago in Nottingham. I think it might have been this project space. You track down the name of the artist, you go to their website, and there hasn't been anything posted for 3 years, and the photograph of the thing that you think you saw isn't actually very good.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's really difficult to make a judgment call about whether to contact that person, even based on the memory of what you've seen or not. And I had a really interesting conversation with Joe Hill at the Focal Point Gallery last year, when we were planning inland, and he said for every exhibition they do a small artist commission envelope size, which goes out, and the information about the exhibition is just stamped on the envelope. But it has to be a really beautiful thing that people will just want to keep.
You know, it gives it a life beyond the moment of the exhibition or the moment of the artwork. Yeah, I think some people are really good at it.
Yeah, there's an importance of digital documentation.
Yeah, and really conventional.
Yeah, easily accessible, and also because you're viewing a lot of things on the screen of information about what you're viewing.
Yeah.
Is this work a photograph, or is it this work a photograph of a sculpture, or is it a photograph of a performance with a sculpture? Because you just don't know unless you know, or you're told. And then an importance of physical object in a digital age that just has a special
totally different
quality.
values.
Yeah. But how you document your work for us as curators is really important. It's how we find a lot of our artists online, as Kat was saying, and when you're documenting your work to send into that open call or whatever it is, really think about it. I mean, we've had work that we've selected for an open call, and when it's come through, it's not been what's in the photograph at all.
Because or it's been a photograph which has got two things in which you assume is the one.
And you just get one.
And it's not the one that was in the foreground.
Surprise.
Yeah. And it's amazing. It's so easy to do.
Yeah.
I think that.
Yeah, but the way we evaluate and document is always changing, and it's so open to ideas and to other input, and we almost see it. It's definitely an art form in itself. It's a way of working. It's a way of thinking, and
the photography is tricky.
Yeah, it's something we're very open to.
We work with different photographers, and some photographers' approaches work really well, and some you don't get what you were hoping.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Okay.
Well, it is tricky, but one thing which hasn't been tricky has been our live broadcast. Hooray! I've been amazed at how simple it's been, and at one point we peaked 5 viewers this evening. So I think we're going to call it at the end there. Thank you both very much, and I'm sorry that we didn't have more people around the table, but I am pleased that we had a couple of people connecting with us online and sending in questions. So thank you for going along with it.
Well, thanks for inviting us.
It's always a real pleasure. It's just nice to talk about things.
And it's been really great to meet some of the members and find out what they're up to as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Nice to come here. We've now seen 2 fantastic shows here.
Excellent.
So that is just such a pleasure.
Good.
Definitely be sharing that around.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to stop the broadcast. For any that have joined part of the way through who might have missed the kind of scene setting at the beginning or some of our early discussions, I believe that as soon as I press stop, it will then appear on YouTube from start to finish. So people can probably press play and hopefully watch it from the beginning. Lucky Elba. Rosie's so pleased.
I know. I can't wait. I'll send that one to my mum.
Great. But thank you very, very much. And I'm going to press stop.